Welcome to this Killick Explains video. This time I want to take on the topic of risk and return, but from the angle of we all want the returns, but are we prepared to carry the appropriate level of risk? And to test this theory I set a very simple Twitter and LinkedIn poll. I said, what level of market correction would cause you to panic sell and dump all your stocks? Now I offered 10% drop in the market, and that attracted 8.1% of the total votes. Then I said, would it take a 25% drop, which you might think sounds big, but actually we have seen that regularly in the past, and that attracted 16.9% of the total votes. Then I said, would it take a 40% drop? So now you're into financial crisis type territory or post-dot-com boom territory, and that attracted 27.2% of the total votes. And then I said, are you the kind of person that actually wouldn't panic, so this is irrelevant? And I'm glad to say in a way that attracted 47.8% of the votes. But here's my challenge. Nearly half the people who responded to my poll said I wouldn't panic regardless of what the market does next. But of course, whether that's actually the case in practice is another matter. So an important part of designing an investment strategy, a portfolio, for example, that you're comfortable with, is thinking through what is the biggest drop in 1 year in the stock market that I would actually be able to weather and still sleep at night and not panic sell. Because the moment you dump stocks, panic, bail out of the market, then try and time your way back in again, you are potentially sacrificing not only short-term returns, but also the compound effect of those returns over time. Plenty of studies have shown that market timing is pretty much a mug's game, other than for a lucky few. So let's just have a think about this. What basically is going to stop you panic selling when things go wrong? Well, let's take one step back first of all and think about a scenario. So let's say you're 30 years old now and you like to stop work completely age 60. You've got 30 years in the middle to accumulate the wealth that's going to allow you to live the lifestyle you want to, families, hobbies, interests and so on after that 30-year period. Now you could then think about potentially modelling the amount you might need when you do stop work age 60. Then you could look at what you've got now. All of this can be done on a more sophisticated spreadsheet, obviously, than this video suggests. You could look at the amount you think you're going to need, the amount you've got now, and then the amount that will be required in the middle to get you from age 30 to age 60 and the pot that you have in mind. Now, you'll need to make some assumptions. You'll need to make some assumptions about the growth rate in equity markets, for example. And the problem here is this. People tend to want to assume that the US equity market growth we've seen over the last 5 years, for example, will continue in perpetuity. And look, I don't have a crystal ball. There's a chance it will, but history suggests that actually recent growth rates in US markets in particular have been pretty punchy. But the problem is people want that upside. So they'll make a projection about what will happen between the ages of 30 and 60 using quite aggressive growth rates, not taking account of how they might react to the market suddenly going into reverse and big drawdown phases taking place, as they're called. Now let's just recap on what you need to do to stop yourself being a forced seller, even with a very calm mindset. And I've covered this elsewhere, but essentially that is all about getting yourself organized. It's all about planning. It's identifying the amount you can commit to the markets for that, let's say, hypothetical 30-year period. And to do that, you need to set aside your rainy day funds. You need to identify those foreseeable calls on capital that will need funding in the medium term. And the rest is then what we call lifetime savings. So that is available potentially to invest over that 30-year time horizon. But the question then becomes, what growth rate do you assume on your investments over that time horizon? And this is where people can get too aggressive. And a useful way to think about this is to reverse engineer it. Think about actually what is the level of drawdown or loss in any 1 year that I could stomach personally, and there's no right answer to this, by the way, people have different natural attitudes to risk, as it's called. Mine might be different to yours, but what is that level? Is it only 10%? Go back to my poll. Is it 25%? Is it 40%? Because essentially, if you're the kind of person that will panic sell out of the market, dump your lifetime savings onto the sideline and into cash at the first whiff of a drawdown of a size that will scare you, then maybe you need to adjust what's in your mix, what's in your asset allocation, what's in your shares basket, if you like, so that you better marry up risk and return. In other words, you may have to anchor down slightly your expectations about returns. Think about other ways to fund your target sum, like saving more, for example, or doing it more tax efficiently in order to get the risk you're carrying down to the right level. Now, there are two levels on which this can be done. You can adjust the blend of the types of asset you hold. So the risk-return trade-off historically differs according to the asset class you're talking about. So it tends to be lower traditionally for certain types of asset class, bonds versus shares, for example. And even within the shares strategic basket, you've got small cap, mid cap, and large cap. And then you've got different markets, emerging markets and developed markets. You've got different themes, for example, digital transformation and so on. So working out basically at the top level what sort of asset allocation will give you the right risk return trade-off is important. And then within a portfolio of say 30 stocks, if that's the route you've chosen to go down, have you got the right blend of individual shares? In other words, are you looking at a portfolio which stands a realistic chance of reducing the risk of an enormous drawdown, or are you running one which actually makes pretty punchy assumptions about returns and you've forgotten that there's no free lunch in investing? In other words, that punchy return comes at a level of risk, and that risk is the danger of a sudden drop in the markets and a year where things could feel pretty uncomfortable. So, conclusions from this short video are: number one, you should have a plan. You should know for how many years you plan to accumulate wealth and then how long you might want to deaccumulate. Yes, this involves estimates, but that's the nature of life. No one knows for sure what their final target date is going to be, as it were. Secondly, you need to set the level of return you expect commensurate with the level of risk you are prepared to bear. In other words, think, what is the biggest single year drawdown I can personally stomach? That will, I'm afraid, influence your expectations about returns. In other words, you can't have your cake and eat it, if you want to see it that way. And thirdly, do review regularly what you are holding in terms of asset classes, and within each asset class, individual investments, and make sure that the balance is correct given your natural attitude to risk and return. Now, I'm covering a vast topic here in a short video, so to find out more you could try our extensive library of other videos, killick.com/learn, and if you'd like a copy of any of my guides which explore some of these angles in a bit more detail, then please ping us an email, editor@killick.com.